What if the darkest corner of your yard, the place where nothing ever seems to grow, could quietly become the most productive part of your whole garden? For years, I believed fruit needed full, blazing sun. I planted berries and little fruit bushes in the brightest spots, watched them burn, sulk, and die, and I walked past my shady areas thinking they were useless. I was wrong. Once I finally tried the right fruits in those shady areas, everything changed. The plants looked calmer, the leaves stayed greener, and those dead corners started giving me bowls of fruit with half the effort. In this video, you are going to discover 15 amazing fruits that actually enjoy low light and partial shade, and how to grow them in the kind of gardens most people think are impossible: narrow side yards, north-facing fences, balconies that barely see the sun, and cool, tree-covered corners. By the end, you'll know exactly which fruits to plant in your own shady spaces, how much light they really need, and simple planting and care steps you can follow, even if your back, knees, or energy aren't what they used to be. And stay with me because one of the fruits near the end behaves almost like a houseplant, but can still give you generous harvests in very low light. Most gardeners never even think to try it. Before we dive in, if you're over 40 and you love gardening, but you're tired of being told your yard is too shady or too small for real fruit, hit that subscribe button right now. This channel is here to help you enjoy easier harvests, smarter planting, and calmer gardening seasons, whether you're in the United States, Canada, or the United Kingdom. Alright, let's start by clearing up one big myth about shade. First up is currants. Red currants and black currants. If you're in a cooler part of the United States, like the Northeast or Pacific Northwest, or in much of Canada or the UK, currants are almost made for you. They actually like cooler air and softer light. A north-facing fence, an east-facing wall that gets morning sun and afternoon shade, or a spot with dappled light under a tree can be perfect. Currants are compact shrubs, so they fit nicely in smaller gardens and townhouses. They don't demand a lot of pruning or climbing. You can keep them around waist to chest height, which is a gift if bending is hard on your body. To plant currants, choose a rich, well-drained soil, add plenty of compost, and keep the roots mulched. In many USDA zones 4 to 7 and similar climates in Canada and the UK, they take partial shade better than many other fruits. The payoff? Long strings of jewel-like berries that are perfect for jams, jellies, and freezing. One big mistake to avoid in the shade is crowding. Even in low light, give your currant bushes space so air can move between them. This helps prevent disease and keeps the leaves healthy and clean. The second fruit is gooseberries. Gooseberries are another classic choice for partial shade in temperate climates. They handle cool conditions very well, which makes them ideal for much of the northern US, southern Canada, and the UK. Again, think of spots that get 3 to 5 hours of gentle sun or dappled light, along a fence, under 5 trees, or on the slightly cooler side of your garden. Gooseberries can be grown as small bushes or trained along wires or a fence, which is perfect if you have a narrow side yard between houses. The fruit has a tangy, sweet, sour taste and is wonderful in pies and preserves. To get the best from gooseberries in shade, make sure the soil drains well but doesn't dry to dust. Mulch around the base to keep moisture steady. Use gloves when you prune or harvest because many varieties have thorns, but the actual work is simple, and you can do most of it at a comfortable height. People often assume these old-fashioned fruits are too fussy. In reality, once established, they can be very low maintenance, especially in cooler, shadier spots where they don't get scorched. The third fruit is a favorite across the US, Canada, and the UK: raspberries. Most raspberry varieties are labeled for full sun, but in warmer or sunnier regions, they often perform better with some protection from harsh afternoon sun. A bed that gets morning sun and afternoon shade, or light filtered through a fence or trees, can give you strong canes and sweeter fruit. In cooler, cloudier areas like parts of the UK and coastal Canada, what you call partial shade might still be perfect for raspberries because the sun is gentler overall. The key is at least a few hours of decent light plus good airflow. For older gardeners, raspberries can be very friendly if you set them up once and keep them tidy. Use simple support wires or a trellis, keep a clear path alongside, and prune out old canes at a comfortable time of year when you're not rushed. The reward is bowls of berries for eating fresh, freezing, or turning into jam. One common mistake in shadier spots is overfeeding raspberries with high nitrogen fertilizer. That can push lots of leafy growth but fewer fruits, especially when light is already limited. Focus on compost and balanced feeding instead of constant booster products. Our fourth fruit in this first part is alpine strawberries. These are not the big, heavy supermarket strawberries. Alpine strawberries stay small and neat. They produce little, intensely flavored berries along the edges of beds, in pots, and even in cracks and corners where other plants struggle. Alpine strawberries are fantastic for shady gardens because they tolerate dappled light and bright shade very well. In the U.S., you can tuck them along the shadier side of a path, under taller plants, or around the base of shrubs. In the UK and cooler parts of Canada, they're a natural fit for cottage-style gardens with mixed sun and shade. They don't need huge containers. A window box on a balcony that only gets morning sun in an apartment in Toronto or London can still produce a lovely handful of fruit. Because they are low to the ground, you can lift pots up onto tables, benches, or stands so you're not bending as much to harvest. The main thing to remember in shade is to avoid waterlogging. Make sure pots and beds drain well, water deeply but not constantly. In return, alpine strawberries will quietly fruit over a long season, adding sweetness and beauty to those softer, cooler corners. If you're already imagining currants along your fence, gooseberries in a cool corner, raspberries in a half-shade row, and alpine strawberries spilling out of a pot on your shady patio, you're exactly the kind of gardener this channel is made for. Before we move on to the next set of shade-loving fruits, take a second to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. If you're over 40 and you want clear, simple, realistic gardening advice for real yards in the US, Canada, and the UK, subscribing means you won't miss the next parts of this series and all the upcoming videos that help you get more harvest from less effort. Fruit 5. Blueberries, especially in containers. Blueberries might surprise you on a list of shade fruits because many labels say full sun. But here's the nuance. In many parts of the United States and southern Canada, full sun can be harsh, especially in summer. If you give blueberries gentle morning sun and light afternoon shade, they often stay healthier and avoid scorched leaves. In cooler climates like much of the UK or coastal regions of Canada, they can handle more sun, but partial shade still works as long as they get a few decent hours of light. Blueberries are excellent for containers. That's good news if bending and kneeling are hard. You can grow them in large pots on a balcony that gets morning light and shade, a patio tucked behind the house, a driveway edge where the sun is softer. The biggest key with blueberries is acidic soil. They like soil that is more acidic than most garden beds. In the U.S., look for potting mix labeled for acid-loving plants, sometimes sold for azaleas or rhododendrons. In Canada and the UK, you'll often see ericaceous compost for the same purpose. Plant 1 or 2 blueberry bushes in a roomy container with drainage holes. Water deeply and regularly, but don't let them sit in a saucer of water for days. In partial shade, the soil will stay damp longer, so check with your fingers instead of watering on a strict schedule. For older gardeners, containers have another advantage. You can lift the pot up on bricks, a stand, or a sturdy table, so harvesting is easier on your back. And when you see those blueberries turning ripe, you'll know that little shady corner is finally working for you. Fruit 6. Dwarf or patio pears in partial shade. Many people think of fruit trees as huge, sun-hungry giants, but there are compact options that handle partial shade. One of the best is dwarf or patio pears. Full-sized pear trees love sun, but if you choose a dwarf or semi-dwarf variety and place it where it gets a few hours of light, maybe on a west-facing wall in the UK or an east-facing deck in the US or Canada, you can still enjoy crops. For a 40-plus audience, the trick is to keep the tree small and reachable. Look for dwarf or patio on the label, and consider growing the tree in a large container. The roots stay contained, the tree stays shorter, and you can prune it to a size you're comfortable caring for. In partial shade, pears might take a bit longer to ripen and may not be as sweet as in full sun, but you can still get plenty of usable fruit. Think of them as steady, reliable givers rather than show-offs. Place your dwarf pear where it gets morning or afternoon sun, light moving across it for at least 3 to 4 hours, and some protection from harsh midday heat, especially in hotter U.S. states. Feed it with a balanced, slow-release fertilizer in spring, keep the soil moist but not soggy, and remove dead or crossing branches once a year. Imagine being able to step outside your back door and pick your own pears from a tree that doesn't tower over you or demand a ladder. That's the kind of low-stress, high-reward gardening that suits an older body and a busy life. Fruit 7. Sour, tart cherries along a cool wall. Sweet cherries usually want lots of sun, but sour or tart cherries can cope better with partial shade, especially in cooler regions. These are often used for pies, jams, and preserves, and they can be grown as smaller trees or even trained against a wall, an espalier, in the US, Canada, or the UK. A classic example is a tart cherry variety trained along a north or east-facing wall. The wall reflects some light, protects the tree from cold winds, and gives it just enough sun to set fruit while keeping it cooler in hot weather. For an older gardener, this style has two big advantages. One, the tree can be kept flat and fairly low, so most of the pruning and harvesting happens at a comfortable height. Two, because it's against a wall, you're not walking all around it or ducking under branches. In partial shade, sour cherries may take a little longer to color up, but they tend to be more forgiving than sweets. The blooms in spring are beautiful, and the harvest can be generous. To care for them, plant in well-drained soil. Cherries dislike wet feet. Prune lightly to keep air moving through the branches. Give a mulch ring around the base to keep roots cool and moist. If you live in a cooler zone in the US, much of Canada, or most of the UK, a tart cherry in a bright but not baking hot spot can become one of the prettiest and most productive features of your shady garden. Fruit 8. Lowbush or wild blueberries and similar ground cover fruits. While we've already talked about regular blueberries in containers, there's another group worth mentioning separately: lowbush blueberries, sometimes called wild blueberries, and similar ground cover fruits like lingonberries. These small, low-growing plants naturally live under taller vegetation in the wild. That means they're already adapted to dappled light, cool soil, and partial shade. In the northeastern United States, parts of Canada, and cooler regions of the UK, lowbush blueberries and similar plants can form beautiful, edible carpets under trees or along paths. For an older gardener, they offer something special. Very little pruning, easy picking if you raise them slightly in beds or low containers, and a soft green look that covers bare soil and suppresses some weeds. They prefer acidic soil like their taller blueberry cousins and appreciate mulch to keep roots cool and moist. Plant them where they get broken light through branches or a mix of morning sun and afternoon shade. Because their fruits are small, you might not be filling massive buckets, but you'll enjoy handfuls of intensely flavored berries over time. And your shady areas will look alive instead of empty. Before we move to the next part and unlock even more problem-solver fruits for deeper shade and tricky spots, take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. Fruit 9. Rhubarb, the shade workhorse. Rhubarb is technically a vegetable, but in home gardens across the US, Canada, and the UK, it behaves like a fruit because we use the stalks in pies, crumbles, jams, and sauces. The reason rhubarb is such a gift in a shady garden is simple. It loves cool soil and can handle partial shade very well. If you live in a cooler climate, think USDA zones 3 to 7 in much of the northern US and Canada, or most of the UK, rhubarb will often do better with some protection from hot afternoon sun. A bed that gets morning light and then shade, or a spot near the north side of a building where the sun slides past for a few hours can be ideal. For older gardeners, rhubarb has big advantages. It's perennial. You plant it once, and it comes back year after year. The leaves are large, which shades the soil and helps keep weeds down. You harvest thick, easy-to-grab stalks instead of tiny, fiddly fruits. To grow rhubarb in partial shade, give it rich soil with plenty of compost and good drainage. It doesn't like to sit in waterlogged ground, especially in winter. Space plants so their big leaves can spread without crowding. One important safety note: only eat the stalks. The leaves are not edible. But once you know that, rhubarb becomes one of the lowest effort ways to turn a cool, half-lit area into a steady supply of fruit-like hardest. Fruit 10. Blackberries for cooler, shadier edges. Blackberries are often sold as full-sun plants, but like raspberries, they can give very respectable crops in partial shade, especially in hotter or sunnier regions where full sun can be too intense. If you're in the southern or central United States, or in a sunnier part of Canada, a row of blackberries that gets morning sun and then dappled light, or that is tucked along a fence with some afternoon shade, may actually stay healthier and less stressed than one baking all day. For a 40-plus audience, the key is to choose thornless varieties where you can. Thornless blackberries are much kinder on hands, arms, and clothing, and are far easier to manage if mobility is limited. Here's what makes blackberries a strong choice for tricky spots. They're vigorous and forgiving once established. They can be trained along a fence or trellis, turning a boring boundary into a living wall of fruit. The canes can be kept at a height where you don't need to crouch or reach too high. To grow blackberries in partial shade, give them reasonable drainage, don't plant in soggy soil, space between plants for air to move through the canes, and simple yearly pruning to remove old, dead canes and encourage new growth. In the UK and many Canadian regions, wild brambles already prove that this family of plants will tolerate a lot less light than people think. You're just choosing nicer, more manageable varieties for your own space. Fruit 11. Hardy kiwi, the shade-tolerant climber. When people hear kiwi, they often think of the big, fuzzy fruits from the grocery store and imagine they need tropical sun. But there is a group called hardy kiwi that can handle colder climates and partial shade. Hardy kiwis produce smaller, smooth-skinned fruits that you can often eat whole, like grapes. They grow as vigorous vines. In the right place, they can turn an ugly fence, pergola, or wall into a lush green fruiting screen. In the U.S., hardy kiwi can suit many temperate zones where winters are cold but summers aren't brutally hot. In parts of Canada and much of the UK, they can also thrive as long as the soil drains well and they get some light each day. For older gardeners, hardy kiwi is most realistic if you give it a strong support structure from the start, decide how tall you want it and prune to keep it within reach, and plant it where you can walk right up to it without climbing or stretching dangerously. In partial shade, hardy kiwi may take a bit longer to ripen than in full sun, but the vine's natural habit of growing under and through other vegetation means it often adapts well to softer light. One thing to know, some hardy kiwi varieties need both a male and a female plant for good fruit set, while some newer types are self-fertile. When you buy, check the labels so you don't end up with just a non-fruiting partner. If you've ever wished you could hide an ugly fence or create privacy in a narrow, not-so-sunny side yard, hardy kiwi might be the climbing fruit that makes that space finally earn its keep. Fruit 12. Pawpaw, the understory tropical treat. Pawpaw is one of the most surprising fruits on this list, especially for viewers in the United States and Canada. It's a native North American tree that produces soft, custard-like fruit with a flavor people often compare to banana, mango, or a tropical mix. The reason pawpaw belongs in a shady garden video is that in nature, it is an understory tree. That means it naturally grows under taller trees, in dappled light or partial shade. In many eastern and midwestern U.S. states, and in similar zones in Canada, pawpaws can be grown in home gardens where they get bright, indirect light, dappled shade through branches, or a mix of morning sun and afternoon shade. For an older gardener, pawpaw has pros and cons. On the plus side, once established, the tree can be relatively low maintenance. It can fill a cool corner that would be too shady or sheltered for fussier fruit. And the fruit is unusual, and growing a native species can feel very rewarding. On the challenge side, pawpaws can take a few years before they start fruiting. You may need more than one tree for good pollination, depending on the variety. And the fruits can be soft and need gentle handling when ripe. If you're willing to plant for the future, pawpaw is a beautiful way to make use of deeper shade in a U.S. or Canadian garden, especially in places that already match its natural range. In the UK, it's more experimental and climate-dependent, so check local advice before planting. But for many North American viewers, this is the fruit that proves even the shadier, woodland-feeling parts of a yard can give something that tastes like it came from far away. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part, where we'll cover the final fruits on this list, and then map out exactly where to put them in your own yard, whether you're in the US, Canada, or the UK, and whether you're working with a big plot or just a small shaded balcony. Fruit 13. Elderberry, the tough hedgerow fruit. Elderberry is one of those plants that quietly survives in places where more delicate fruits give up. You often see it growing at the edges of woods, along country lanes, and in hedgerows in the UK, the northern US, and parts of Canada. That alone tells you something important. Elderberries can cope with partial shade and dappled light very well. For an older gardener, elderberry offers toughness. Once established, it's hard to kill. Height that can screen an ugly view or provide privacy. Useful flowers and berries for syrups, jellies, and cordials. Elderberries like moist, well-drained soil and can grow quite large, so think of them as a background shrub or informal hedge, not a tiny container plant. A spot that gets morning sun and afternoon shade or light moving through trees can still give you good crops in cooler climates. 2 important points. 1. Many varieties need a second plant for good pollination, so plan on at least 2. 2. The raw berries and certain parts of the plant need cooking and proper preparation before eating. Always follow safe recipes and guidelines. If you have a deep, slightly wild corner at the back of your property, an elderberry or two can turn it into a valuable, fruiting hedge instead of a forgotten tangle. Fruit 14. Fig, in bright shade or partial sun. Figs often appear in sunny Mediterranean images, but many home gardeners in the US, Canada, and the UK are successfully growing them in partial shade and still getting fruit. The trick is to understand that figs are quite adaptable. Their fruits are relatively small, and the plants can handle light reflected off walls, a mix of sun and shade over the day, and even large containers. If you're in a cooler climate, like much of the UK or coastal Canada, you may want to give your fig the brightest spot you can, even if it's still not full, harsh sun. In hotter U.S. states, a fig that gets morning or late afternoon sun and some shade in the middle of the day can avoid leaf scorch and stress. For older gardeners, figs in containers are especially helpful. You can keep the plant pruned to a manageable size. You can move the pot a little if you need to adjust the light. You can raise the container to reduce bending. Choose a variety suited to your climate. Use a large pot with good drainage and feed the plant during the growing season. In partial shade, you may get slightly smaller crops than in perfect sun, but figs can still reward you with sweet, soft fruit that feels like a luxury from a corner that used to do nothing. Fruit 15. Meyer lemon, or compact citrus in bright, indirect light. Now for the fruit that behaves almost like a houseplant, but can still reward you in lower light. Meyer lemon, or other compact citrus in bright, indirect light. In many parts of the U.S., Canada, and the UK, citrus can't live outside all year. But you can grow a dwarf lemon or other small citrus in a pot and move it between outdoors and indoors or a sheltered spot. Here's where the shade part comes in. Citrus often does well with bright, indirect light rather than harsh all-day sun, especially when grown in containers. A Meyer lemon on a sunny but not baking hot patio or near a bright window can still flower and fruit even without a full day of direct sun. For older viewers, this can be a game changer. The plant lives in a pot you can keep near a door, on a patio, or even just outside a kitchen. You can raise it on a stand so watering and harvesting don't strain your back. In winter, in colder regions, you can bring it into a bright porch or near a window instead of losing it to frost. Will you get as many lemons as a tree in a commercial orchard? No, but you don't need that. You only need enough for fresh slices and water, a few desserts, or cooking, and you get the joy of picking them yourself. This is the kind of fruit that proves a low-light gardener can still have something that feels special and a little bit exotic, even from a patio or balcony. Now that you've met all 15 fruits, let's turn this into something you can actually use when you step outside. Close your eyes for a moment and picture your space in 3 simple zones. Light shade or partial sun, 3 to 5 hours of direct light or moving dappled sun. This is where most of your fruit power will be. Great choices here include currants, gooseberries, raspberries, blackberries, dwarf pears, sour cherries, hardy kiwis, figs, and elderberries in cooler climates. Rhubarb where summers are not extremely hot. Dappled shade or bright indirect light. These are spots under trees or between buildings where the light moves but rarely blasts. Strong choices include alpine strawberries and lowbush berries as ground covers. Rhubarb in cool climates. Hardy kiwi on a sturdy support. Pawpaw in its natural woodland-style setting. Elderberry at the edge of trees or fences. Container blueberries tucked where they get gentle light. Sheltered spots and indoor-outdoor crossovers. These are patios, balconies, porches, and bright windowsills in the US, Canada, and the UK. Ideal for container blueberries, dwarf figs, Meyer lemon and other compact citrus, and alpine strawberries in boxes and hanging baskets. Now, instead of thinking, "My garden is too shady," you can ask a better question. What kind of shade do I have, and which of these fruits match it best? For older gardeners, the final step is to pair light level with comfort. Put the plants you'll harvest most often closer to the house and at a height that feels kind to your body. Keep anything that needs more pruning or tying near a solid path or patio, not across uneven ground. Use containers, raised beds, and supports to bring the work up to you instead of forcing you down to the ground. If this video has helped you see your shady garden in a new way, and you're already imagining currants along your fence, rhubarb in that cool corner, pawpaws under the trees, and a Meyer lemon by your back door, then you are exactly who this channel is for. You don't need a perfect, sunny, flat garden to enjoy real harvests. You just need the right plants in the right places, and advice that respects your time, your body, and your reality after 40. So if you haven't yet, take a moment right now to subscribe and turn on notifications. Your shady garden is not wasted space. It's your future fruit patch, and this is just the beginning.